Thank you very much. And I'm starting by echoing what Danny was saying about, the shamrock of the trifecta of competitiveness, price of electricity and security of supply. We really think that renewables is as much as possible the way to go. And by the way, also mentioning Ireland focus on intangible assets. To me, this means electricity. And like Unag was saying, if we manage to decarbonize power production, we're really a long way in creating, I think, solidity and competitiveness for our economy of the future. But I'm here to talk to you about the emission trading system, of which we are celebrating 20 years. Many of you have already referred to it. Maybe quickly for those who don't know exactly what it is and how it works. It basically says that in Europe, everybody who has a lot of emissions of CO2, basically if you produce electricity or if you are a big industry that has to use a lot of heat to melt metal, cement, ceramics, everything where you need 1,000 degrees, if you pollute CO2 into the atmosphere, you need a permit and you need to buy it. You buy these, we call them allowances from us. We have regular auctions, give that the money to the member states. And then every year you say, okay, I polluted 100, PATs have to surrender back the allowances that I bought. The point of this is to have a market-driven system that creates an incentive to pollute less. Because as a company, you say, okay, I'm going to pay 100,000 euros to buy the permits. It costs me 50,000 euros to invest in a more efficient system. It's better for me to clean up my act, invest in a cleaner production method, and I will have a lower cost into the carbon tax or into the buying ETS allowances. The system's been running for 20 years, from 2005, and it works. We look at the numbers of last year, we see that in the last 20 years, we have cut emissions by 50%. So it really has a tremendous impact. We see it even in particular in the electricity sector, so in power generation, where now the production of electricity from fossil fuels is the smallest component compared to nuclear for the countries that choose to have them and renewables. The emissions of CO2 in electricity last year fell by 25%. So it's really a big drive that unfortunately the war in Ukraine and Russia also pushed us to develop further our capacity in renewable energy generation. But we can really see a big change in renewable, and also welcome Ireland's plan to increase renewables to 40-something% by 2030. Now, of course, there is a price to pay for the pollution, and it is the price that drives the investment. As like Danny was saying, internalizing the external cost of the pollution, making it something which has a monetary value so that you decide to invest in cleaner technology instead. At the beginning, the price was not working well. We probably were selling too many allowances, or we had some opening to some international credits. So the price was being quite low, even though we would still see a little bit of reductions. We had to change a bit the way the system works. We have a thing which is called the market stability reserve. So basically, we look at how many permits are into the market. If there are 2 or 3 times the demand of 1 year, they just hold back the allowances. We don't auction any more allowances because there are enough allowances in the system. We see that this tool, plus, of course, the fact that our targets become more stringent, have driven a price which this last year has been going around 60, 70, 80 euros, which we see has a strong effect in driving investment away from pollution. Of course, taxing people is not the point. This is an environmental measure. We can do it for the sake of it. We do it to take the money. We do it because we want a transformation, and so there's a price signal, but there is also a lot of support to industries who choose to move away from fossil fuels and to pollute less. We spent 200 billion in these 20 years supporting the modernization and to clean industrial production and power production. The instruments which are called the Modernization Fund, the instrument which is called the Innovation Fund to support the deployment of new technologies. Some of these permits, we also give them for free to the industries which are exposed to the risk of carbon leakage. So the ones we trade more outside the European Union. The objective is, yes, to reduce emissions, but it's also to support and keep a healthy industrial and economic system. But we also think that there's no point competing with China on price. We have to compete on innovative products, on products which are close to market, which are showcasing the best that we can do in Europe in terms of innovation and deployment. And we see that green technology, green products are really the market of the future where everybody's investing. And because we come from this transition, we think that's the place where we can generate more jobs and more competitive. So the ETS is working, putting a price on emissions. It's driving down emission and it's generating revenue, which we reinvest back into modernization and more competitiveness. There is the issue that was mentioned of carbon. There's no point that a cement producer in Ireland has to pay €100 a ton for its CO2 emission when a producer, cement is very easy, but a producer outside the European Union does not pay the carbon price, and therefore its product is cheaper. And when we compete on the same market, whether it is in Europe or in the US or on export market. So this is where CBAM comes in, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. What we say is that when you produce steel, cement, fertilizers, aluminum in Europe, you have to pay a carbon price. When we import steel, cement, aluminum from outside the European Union, we would like to charge this product with the equivalent carbon price that was paid by the European producer. Of course, the calculation is very complicated because the ETS is based on installation, so it is the whole factory that looks at emission. It's not that we go and count how many CO2 one ton of steel has generated, but we try to find a way of counting this, and when the Chinese steel comes in, we say, okay, you have to pay the same cost. This is a way of again shielding our producers from unfair competition and making sure that carbon price is paid also at our border. This, of course, is a matter very important also for the island of Ireland. One thing that sure you all know is that CBAM does not imply physical checks at the border. When you're already importing steel from Belfast to Dublin, you already need to have a steel import declaration. You just need to tick a box, but nobody's going to check on the lorry at the border if you've done your CBAM declaration. You've done on the computer. At the end of the year, you pay whatever you have to pay in terms of carbon price. Second, CBAM we proposed, and it's already quite close to agreeing, a massive simplification of CBAM. This is a new measure. We didn't know exactly how it was going to work. We've done a dry run. So CBAM enters into function next year, but already last year and this year, we asked people to do the declaration and not pay anything. And through these declarations, we learned that the number of small importers, the number of small transactions, quite a lot. And if we focus only on the big importers or the people who have the biggest transaction, we can capture, 95% of the emissions with only focusing on 10% of the people. And so there's this simplification package that dramatically simplifies everything for the small importers. And that, again, from an Irish perspective, this is a measure that can also make trade and commerce on the island of Ireland much, much smoother and much more simple. Where are we going forward now? So the ETS has been working well. In the last legislative process, we've increased its scope. So I mentioned power generation. We call it energy-intensive industry, everything where you have very high temperature. We brought in also the fuels that go into roads, transport, and the heating. So this is what we call ETS2. It's a separate price, it's a smaller price for the moment. But we think that given the difficulty that also you have mentioned in Ireland in cutting emissions in these sectors, we need to use all the tools at our disposal. So, of course, if you think about transport, yes, we have regulations about the pollution of engines. Yes, we have regulations about moving to more and more electric cars. Yes, we try to accompany you in having a multimodal mobility that relies as much as possible on less polluting means. But it seemed to us that also putting a price incentive, which has worked very well in power and industry, could also be part of the mix in driving down emissions. And with this, plus the expansion also to international maritime transport, carbon pricing in Europe covers now 75% of emissions. So one way or another, we have the tool, the market-based tool of carbon pricing, which helps us make sure that we cut emissions in the cheapest possible way, covering the lion's share of our economy. Just transition, of course, is always the counterbalance to carbon pricing. Yes, we generate revenue, yes, we tax people, but we use the money to reinvest back into the system, into the society, to help people decarbonize. And so, for example, in the area of ETS2, so road transport and buildings, we have this social climate fund that will help, again, through the member states, of course, more vulnerable households to not feel these increasing prices and to change the heating system, to lease an electric car, to do or a number of measures to help them manage the transition. Ireland is a bit special there because, as you know better than I, you have a carbon tax already in this system. You have a little transition and exemption for the ETS2. And so for you, the system will adjust, let's say, a little bit different than the rest of Europe until for the next few years. Finally, how is the ETS and CBAM going to work? How does it relate with international? We know that in Europe, we regulated the economy until 2030 in terms of climate. We have a proposal coming up soon, we hope, about target for Europe for 2040 of a 90% net reduction. Once that proposal is adopted, we will need to then look at how the ETS will function between 2030 and 2040, how the other pieces of climate legislation will function between 2030 and 2040. There's no formal decision yet, but I think the Irish presidency will have quite a role to play in managing these discussions once our proposals are out. For the ETS, of course, we continue to reduce the emissions. We are thinking about the role of what we call removals of negative emissions. So, for example, you can capture the CO2 up at the top of your chimney. How do we count that? Or there are increasing technology that can already capture CO2 directly from the air. Should we integrate them into the ETS? If you burn a biogenic fuel, which in ETS means a fuel that comes not from fossil fuel, and therefore in theory does not count in terms of emission, and you capture the CO2, can we give you a credit? So we are trying to, again, to accompany the industry in decarbonizing, but also looking at new technologies that reduce emission and can create a bit of more flexibility into the system. On CBAM, the next discussion is going to be how do we help exporters? Because what I told you, we put a carbon price at our border that applies to the Chinese and the Americans and everybody, helps people sell in Europe. But if, like many Irish companies, export to the United States, you have no help. You pay a carbon price in Europe, but you export to a market where there is no carbon price in many parts of the United States. So we are also trying to develop a solution to help exporters feeling a little bit less the pressure coming from a domestic carbon price, which is not matched by the others. Of course, the ideal world is a world where everybody increases their carbon pricing, in which everybody introduces a high level of climate ambition and taxes or has an emission trading system or takes regulatory measures to reduce their emissions. The mere fact that we propose CBAM has brought many, many third countries knocking at our door and say, what can we do to be exempted or to pay less from CBAM? Because in CBAM, we say, if you Chinese already pay a carbon price in China, I'm going to make a discount. I'm going to recognize the carbon price that is paid abroad. And a lot of third countries have realized that, okay, my exports are going to pay a carbon price one way or another. Either I pay at the European border and the European takes the money, or I pay it at home and I take the money to invest in decarbonization. So we see a great interest in many countries that want to develop carbon pricing or ETS in their own jurisdictions. And we even had to create a task force that talks to these countries, accompanies them, we give them technical knowledge, and we try to support them in creating this carbon pricing instrument. The best way of cooperating with someone on carbon pricing is to link the ETS market. As you've seen in the reset of the relations with the UK, we are going to explore, we're going to negotiate the linkage between the EU ETS and the UK ETS. And of course, the consequence of the linkage is, yes, our systems work better together, but also if our markets are linked, there's no need to apply CBAM to each other because we have the same price. And so if you have a linked ETS, there's no CBAM between the two countries. So again, this I think is a very interesting file from an Irish perspective. I know there's a lot of expectations to this, but maybe to explain this is not going to happen tomorrow. The process that this agreement will need to go through is a full international agreement. So we need to get a mandate to negotiate, we need to negotiate it, and then it needs to be ratified by our European Parliament and by the Council of our Ministers. So it's not going to happen in a couple of weeks, but I think it's a very good perspective going forward to know that we will eventually have linked carbon markets with the UK, and therefore no application of CBAM between our two economies. Well, I stop here and I look forward to joining you for the panel now. Thank you.